Hi everyone! As part of our Earth Week craft series, we host papermaking and wanted to share the experience here. Using your old paper scraps to make new pieces is a great way to upcycle. We referenced 3 Instructable tutorials, linked in the description below. Although the specifics of the tutorials varied, the basic idea is this. Blend paper scraps with water to make a pulp. Scoop or pour that pulp onto a mesh frame. Squeeze out the excess water. Let it dry. Based on that information, here's the materials we used. Paper scraps, of most any kind, including printer paper, tissue paper, egg cartons, and more. A blender, not the same one you eat with though. Check out your local thrift stores if you need one. Paint or dye, optional. 2 ideally wooden picture frames. Mesh, like for window screens. A sponge. A way to attach the mesh to your frame. And a tub for the pulp and excess water. Let's get started. First things first, gather some scrap paper. It can be helpful to cut it or shred it beforehand so the blender has less work to do. Next, attach the mesh to one of the frames. I pre-made a frame for this, but the idea is that you stretch the mesh as taut as you can across the picture frame. We found that using gaffer tape worked really nicely for this. Next, blend your paper up with some water. You want to make a fine pulp. The finer the pulp, the smoother or softer the paper will be. We found that using equal parts paper and water led to thick paper, whereas 2/3 water and 1/3 paper led to new paper that was approximately as thick as a sheet of printer paper. If you're adding paint, it's best to add it in this step. Next, you'll make a sandwich of the 2 frames. The frame without any mesh in it is called the decal. It'll serve as the mold for a piece of paper. Stack the decal face down on top of the mesh. Next, cover the mesh in pulp using one of 2 methods. The first method is to submerge the frame in the pulp mixture by lowering the frames into the tub. Hold the decal and frame together firmly or use rubber bands to hold them together. It takes some practice to figure out how deep into the mixture you need to go in order to get a nice sheet of paper. And you'll need a tub that is bigger than your frames. We found that this method was better for producing thinner sheets of paper. Secondly, you could pour pulp over the frame. Placing the frame over a spare tub to catch excess water, pour the pulp over the frame and use a spatula to spread the pulp around evenly. At this point, you can remove the decal. Then, squish the excess water out. The easiest way to get water out was to take a spare piece of mesh and place it on top of the paper pulp while it was still on the mesh frame. Then, using a sponge, squeeze out excess water into a tub. We found that using a sponge in a rocking motion rather than a dabbing motion worked a lot better. At this point, let it dry. Leaving it on the mesh allows for better airflow. However, it's important to note that whatever surface you leave the paper on to dry will impact the surface texture of your paper. Now you have some homemade paper. You can see here the difference in the kinds of paper we get based on the grain size of our pulp. The chunkier the pulp, the thicker the paper, and the smoother the pulp, the thinner and more flexible the paper is. You can experiment with different kinds of dye, adding in pressed plants, string, and more to give your paper a unique flair too. Happy making, and thanks for watching!